Thank you so much for tuning into my show, William Wallace for America. I appreciate your time and I'm grateful that you're spending it with me. We kicked off the holiday season yesterday with Thanksgiving. I know I'm getting attacked. I hear the people in the background already. That's not the holiday season. Jesus is the reason for the season. And while I certainly agree with that, I always like to say the holiday season because it encompasses all of the holidays in there. And yes, I specifically like to say Merry Christmas on Christmas and around Christmas. But right now we got Thanksgiving, we got Christmas coming up. We're going to have New Year's, lots of holidays in between, and lots of family gatherings. So it's just kind of a holiday time, which I did notice, by the way, that it seems like Christmas actually started a little bit earlier this year, a few weeks ago, like as soon as Halloween was over, which, of course, a month or so ago. I see already the stores are selling Christmas decorations, and I was hearing Christmas music places before Thanksgiving. So I'm just curious, is that because we're seeing an uptick in Christianity and holiday or Christmas celebration, and more people excited about the Christmas holiday or about the Christianity aspect? Or is it simply that sales are down in our country and the stores could use a boost, and Christmas always gives them a boost? I'll let you decide. That's just one little intro on my show today. Of course, I'm going to have some memes in the background for you when you're watching the video aspect of this. I'm going to talk about the subjects from those if you're listening to the podcast version, and you're going to see different slides come up, particularly ones from my sponsors like the Wellness Company. And if you look at that, you'll see that the Wellness Company is offering 20 to 25% off items in their inventory right now for Black Friday weekend special. But if you go to twc.health /WWFA, it's twc.health /WWFA, you'll get 20 to 25% off all of their products. Go check them out. It's really important that you do because it's a great time to get a big discount and see how wonderful those products are for your medical freedom. In today's show, I've got a lot of different things I'm going to talk to you about, but I try to start off talking about one topic, and we're going to kind of stick to that a little bit. Yeah, I'm going to go off the road a little bit, off the rails, off the tracks a little bit, because there's some different things that I think are off the topic, but start from the topic. And I'm going to double down on something I talked about on my last show, that I think that the justice system in our country has been corrupted by narratives and the political winds and wins, WINS, because our country is being run by our justice system, essentially. I get it. No, we have congressmen and senators and a president, but as you all hear, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more throughout the first half of my show, people are blaming Donald Trump when he's circumventing the justice system. He's a king. He's making his own rules and laws because he's doing this outside of our legal system or outside of our constitution or outside of the legislative body. And then meanwhile, you'll hear about some judge that lets a criminal out free that has had 30 prior convictions. And you'll hear about judges that are making rulings that don't sound legal or don't sound like they have gone through our judicial system properly. Now, let me say this. I'm not an attorney, nor am I really up on all the particular laws and the judicial system. I'm giving you my very casual layman's perception from the outside looking in on just kind of what I'm seeing as an individual. And I've talked to a lot of people that are kind of the same qualifications as I am in the legal system. And they kind of all agree when you start looking at it from these perspectives, you start to wonder, well, how is our legal system getting away with this? Why are they doing this? And we all just kind of shrug and go, well, it's the legal system. It's got to be legal because it's happening in our legal system. But still, I scratch my head on a lot of these things because I go, well, how does that make some of these proceedings or outcomes from our judicial system correct? And so I started asking some questions, which I'm going to do in this show. I'm going to kind of go over some things that I kind of Googled and looked at, which makes me kind of go, hmm, is it our judicial system that's gone awry? Is it our political system that's gone awry? Are our elected officials circumventing the judicial system like many think they are? Of course, when it's a Republican elected official, every Democrat and the narratives will be, well, you're Trump or whoever, they're, manipulating the legal system. But then when a Democrat does it, oh, well, that's our democracy. That's our democratic system in place. It's working because the narratives support or don't support elected officials as they have cases. Of course, I'm speaking from a very broad view. I'm not necessarily speaking about any specific thing. I'm kind of lumping things together because, quite honestly, I don't have the time, nor do you, to listen to go down the rabbit hole of every single instance or situation or example of all the different stories and the mind perplexing situations from specific judges or politicians on what they've done. But just in general, I want people to look at this from an overview and start observing, start looking at how our judicial system, I believe, has been corrupted by many things. And I'll take you down that road here on some of the things that I think is corrupting our system. Let's first. So I looked up. You keep hearing about things like precedent. So I'm going to give you some definitions that I'm going to use here in the beginning of the show that I think you need to be aware of. So precedent. What is precedence in the law? Is it law? What is precedence in the law? Because you always hear about a case where they'll say, well, that's the precedent, or that, a judge set the precedence on that, or a jury ruled a certain way. So there's precedence. I looked it up. So the precedent in law refers to a legal rule or guideline established by a previous court decision that serves as a standard for similar cases in the future. It is a principle that allows courts to rely on the outcomes of earlier cases to guide their decisions in new cases involving similar facts or legal issues. The practice is primarily rooted in the doctrine of stare decisis, which requires courts to apply the law consistently to ensure fairness and predictability in the legal system. That sounds really pretty, doesn't it? That sounds all good. And some of my attorney friends are probably cheering, going, that's just how it works. But is it really how it should work? Let's think about this. If a judge, which I'm going to give that in just a second, definition, or a jury decides a certain way, it's the opinion of one person or a group of people, not elected officials creating a law or going through our Constitution or our legislative process or even on our state legislative process. It's a jury of people that were selected or a judge that was elected or appointed that gets to make a rule based on their opinion. Why? And then the problem is that when this becomes precedence, it becomes known as common law, which every American in the future has to live by it. Does that make it right? Does that make it correct? this is where my argument comes in, that our justice, our country is losing a lot of power in our legislative process because our judicial system is being overused. It's being abundantly used by politicians who get elected, and the narratives being used to manipulate our thinking, and judges who are more interested in what's better for the greater good, or in their opinions becoming law to guide every other American based on their opinion. So, what happens as a result, which I'll go into a little bit more later, is we, the people, end up losing our individual freedoms and our liberties and our rights, because instead of going through the legislative representative process, it's coming out of the opinion in common law. So the justice system has been corrupted by narratives and the political winds, as I said a little while ago, that blow, and the wins or victories. And our country is being run by our justice system. And most people don't notice it. Many that do aren't necessarily seeing the problem. And most attorneys and judges have too much respect for precedents, i.e., the opinion of a judge or a earlier court decision through a jury, or those attorneys just consider going against the court akin to disrespecting the justice system, which they were sworn to protect. And some people see it as the opposite. They see our justice system is being attacked by the political system, and specific politicians, especially the ones they don't like, are the root of the problem. Or is it that the narratives have just convinced enough people that those politicians aren't doing the right thing, or they're not operating within the purview of our judicial system? So before we continue down that rabbit hole, I want to go to what is judicial precedent, because I think this is another good example, which is going to give us some more information on why I believe our justice system is gaining too much power over people's rights and liberties and freedoms in our country. Judicial precedent, also known as case law, is a fundamental principle in common law systems where past judicial systems guide future cases, ensuring consistency and predictability in the law. Judicial precedence refers to the process by which courts follow the previously decided cases when ruling on new cases with similar facts. This practice is encapsulated by the Latin term stare decisis. I might be saying that wrong, meaning to stand by things decided. It ensures that legal principles established in earlier cases are applied consistently in future cases, promoting stability and fairness in the legal system. I don't know where this is set up in our Constitution. Maybe it's referred to, maybe it's not. But the problem is that it creates binding precedent, which is decisions made by higher courts must be followed by lower courts within the same jurisdiction. For example, a ruling from the Supreme Court is binding on all lower courts. And persuasive precedent, decisions from other jurisdictions or lower courts that are not obligatory but may influence a court's decision. Courts may consider these precedents when there is no binding precedent in the issue at hand. Why do we need precedent? Why do we need precedent that was formed by an opinion of a judge, or let's just say a court? And I get it. Many attorneys don't fight this because they have too much respect for the judge or the jury or the court system, that or the bench where the judge sits, to buck the system. But the problem is these opinions in my opinion, are becoming law. And I would beg my attorney friends that hear this, if you think that I'm wrong or you got some correction, please do so. But again, I get it. I've heard from some other attorneys that go, well, it's common law. We have to respect the judge. And do we respect people who may have opinions based on their political view, deciding a certain way, and we just go with it because, well, they're the judge? That's just how it works. It's precedence. It's just how it works. Which leads me to a Google search that I did. Cases where judges ruled by opinion instead of the law. Once issued, judicial opinions act as precedents for later courts. Thus, opinions provide their own legal rules that become part of American law. Lawyers called such judge-made rules common law. And again, I have many attorney friends that just let it go because they have to have respect for the bench. It's respect for the judges. What about respect for people's rights? Because if you respect a judge who has made a decision based on his opinion, and let's just go down the rabbit hole of liberal and conservative, because obviously you split the country in half when it comes to that. And if you're conservative, yay, they ruled the conservative ruling, or opposite, yay, they're liberal and I'm liberal and they made a liberal decision. But the problem is that most people don't fall in those categories. Yes, they do. They identify a certain way, but the reality is we're all in the same country. And if we start making laws based on opinions just out of respect, then we all end up losing our freedoms and liberties down the road, because some judges are appointed by politicians like the Supreme Court. And those judges, those precedents get to appoint federal judges, some of them for a lifetime. And so we, the people, end up having to live by the rules of the pendulum swinging from the far right to the far left, just because a judge had created a precedent on his opinion and ruled a certain way. So now all the courts have to go that way. Please, if you're listening and you know more than I do, please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not trying to be right or wrong necessarily. I'm trying to give you an observation for everybody to say, does that mean we have to go, storm the courts? No. It just means that we have to start getting more involved in a way where we demand better, and we find ways, which I'd love to ask my attorney friends, how do we get away from precedents becoming the law and instead having some way to connect it to something that has to take place to create a law? How can we say if it happens once, does it mean just because you respect the bench that you have to do it all the time? Were our courts set up that way? Again, I'm not coming to you claiming ignorance. I'm coming to you with observation and with something that I've been looking at more and more and diving more and more into, and I'm going to be doing more and more research on it. Where did this start? Where did it start that we, the people, have to live by a judge's opinion just because they are in the court system? At what point do we say, whoa, wait a minute? Our courts are indeed getting too much control over our lives based on opinions from many appointed judges. Enough people have sought victories to heal their hurt feelings and or get a victory, because the justice system is not always about fairness, and it sometimes it's just about victories. Oftentimes, which again is why my cheers, oh, we got a conservative Supreme Court justice and we got to elect a president because he's going to get us the next conservative it's more about victories than fairness. It's become more about victories than justice for everybody and freedom and liberty for everybody. And that's part of the problem that we, by letting it go and empowering the right when they're in power, if we're on the right, or the left, if you're on the left, when the left is in power, we're giving these elected officials and even these judges more control with our permission by cheering them on just because someone that agrees with us got in power. And then when the pendulum swings to the other way, and we all start losing a little freedom, losing a little liberty, and you watch some judges make decisions that you go, why did that judge let 30, let a criminal with 30, convictions go? Well, it's because of precedents. It's because of the judicial system getting a little bit too much power. It's because judges are ruling more on their feelings and the winds of the political narrative system than they are justice. So was there a time when political precedent was maybe okay? I'm sorry, when the court precedents or judicial precedents was a good thing? Was there a time when, okay, it was understood that they are following the law? This judge is now following the law. When did the narratives and the political feelings of judges get too much permission, we'll say, or passive permission to be where their feelings and beliefs or ideological beliefs become allowed to become laws because of their feelings and their precedents, the rulings or the precedents from their rulings? I get it. I might not be always saying it perfectly. Some of that's because I'm passionately speaking quickly to get all this out. But some of it is, or most of it, and my job is to show you what I'm seeing, share my opinion with you, and get you to do your own research. Find it for your own damn self, kind of thing. Because I don't want to always steer you to the right. I certainly don't want to steer you to the left. I kind of want to bring people to a space where we can kind of discuss things to be able to protect everyone's freedoms and liberties. Most judicial seats have been filled with, political appointees that were a result of the victors of a certain campaign. And instead of those victors undoing wrongs in the legal system, they're really kind of trying to undo the wrongs against the other political or against the political party that's in power. And so again, those political winds shift, if you will. Um, for instance, judges are more and more allowing criminals to go free that have multiple convictions, we'll say. More and more, we're finding that judges, I'm going to kind of say this again for a reason. Judges are more and more allowing criminals to go free out of compassion because the criminal himself or herself may have been victimized by a wrongful society instead of true justice. So a lot of these liberal judges are allowing criminals to go free because they feel the criminals were wronged or society was wronged, or maybe the current conservative Republican president is just too harsh on criminals. So we got to let some of them go. And as a result, society and communities suffer. And so instead of doing what is legal for the greater good based on the law, a lot of criminals are being let go out of compassion and opinion instead of using the law to keep them in jail. And we're finding more and more of those get out and become recidivist. And it's too bad that just because people aren't agreeing or disagreeing with a certain side or topic, they get labeled a certain way, and it comes to what's happening with all these judges. And they I'd say they get labeled, but through some of the process that they're using, they get labeled a certain way. So they don't necessarily end up following the law. Instead, they can create their own common law with their opinions or their actions that they, let me say this, many of them use legal procedures to be able to accomplish some of the things that they're doing, which later become precedents, like letting criminals go based on their opinions of compassion, that these criminals were wronged by some legal system, by some law that was created during a Republican administration or vice versa, a Democrat administration. So we've got to wrong those rights by letting more of them go. It becomes precedents. So more and more judges across the country follow some of that same precedents. And the more we see it, the more common laws that created around that, which is why we will see more of our communities deteriorate with high crime, because they're not always locking up the repeat offenders. So instead of people paying attention to what some people are doing out there, they tend to just say, "Well, that's the legal system. They're in the legal system. Those judges are always going to do what's right legally, right?" And I think what happens when most of society kind of turns the other way and just trust the legal system to always do the right thing, that judges are getting away with the laws that they are creating through precedents and their opinions, using the legal system in some way, shape, or form to not necessarily get away with it. I don't think they're necessarily going, "I'm going to break the law and get away with it." I believe they've found a way to navigate the system and create precedents to help people, or in the case of some of these lawsuits that we see with either corporations or politicians or Trump, them going after Trump in ways, whatever the case may be, they have found ways to use the system to be able to navigate it, to create precedents where the result is that our courts are gaining a lot more power and getting to guide, rule, dictate, and govern our country on a much bigger level than our political system and legislative system is, because we still have that, of course. But when you've got a system operating on top of that, like a software that's kind of like, okay, these politicians did this, and some politician wants to be vindicated, so he sues through the political system, he sues through the justice system, and gets a ruling that creates other elected officials to have to operate in certain ways, or in the case of the system of criminals breaking laws in our communities, in the process, people and communities are losing freedoms, rights, and privileges through the acts of law-breaking criminals and their activities that have more weight on the system than legislation or even bureaucracies themselves. And all of this is being controlled and navigated by judges creating laws through precedents in our system. And it ends up going up to them instead of our legislative bodies, because the courts always end up being the last stand. And because there's so much respect from the average person and the attorneys in our country, it gets passively ignored. And as a result, again, I think our justice system is gaining more and more control, um, which there's some things in our Constitution that I believe are going to um, get affected, one of which is our Second Amendment. You know that I'm a big supporter of our Second Amendment and Bond Arms being one of my favorite gun manufacturers. I'd like for you to check them out at bondarms.com. Don't forget to go there. But I do have another article that I wanted to read for you about our justice system that is something that kind of proves my point. I'm not going to read the whole article. I'm going to skip through it, read you the highlights, but it kind of doubles down that it's not just Republicans who have the opinion, or me, that has the opinion that our justice system is gaining too much control. It's also Democrats that feel that our justice system is gaining too much control. This article was in the Politico in July 1st, 2024. It's written by John F. Harris and Ian Ward in the Political magazine. Left and right agree on one thing: the justice system is corrupted by bias. Just as I was saying, it is now taken for granted that the courts are not on the level and that it's naive to believe otherwise. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi the other day was asked a question that in an earlier time would have invited civics class banalities about a nation of laws and the wisdom of the founding fathers. Do you have confidence in the Supreme Court? Asked CNN's Anderson Cooper. No, responded Pelosi. I think they have gone rogue. It's most unfortunate. Her comment came a few weeks after a successor, Speaker Mike Johnson, similarly found occasion to expound on the integrity of the judicial system. Today is a shameful day in American history. The Speaker declared, following Donald Trump's felony convictions in New York for falsifying records, this was a purely political exercise, not a legal one. See, like I said earlier, depending on what side of the aisle you're on, but both sides are sharing the same opinion that our justice system is gaining too much power, and politicians on both sides are using it. If they don't get their way, they sue. They go through the court system, they sue, they get a victory instead of justice. They get precedents instead of instead of creating a law to prevent some of this, because they're too lazy, because it's not politically expedient for one, and the other, they know that if they create some laws that will help their political system or their political friends or their other politicians, that their position goes on the chopping block and they don't win. It's an apt moment to note, I'll continue rather, it's an apt moment to note a development that has happened in such a steady progression that it can be easy to miss how consequential it is in historical perspective. The country's left and right flanks, endlessly divided in nearly every big question in national life, have arrived at a striking convergence. Both ends of the political spectrum believe the American justice system is simply not on the level. Partisan combatants, of course, disagree on the details. Different cases leave each side aggrieved, but the loudness and ideological slant of the arguments tends to obscure a shared belief: the notion that the nation's legal system, from the Supreme Court down, is hopelessly compromised by bias and scantily clad partisan agendas, is now a foundational assumption across wide swaths of both the conservative and progressive movements. I'll continue down here. Pelosi and Johnson's statements put the new reality in sharp relief. For one, their language isn't especially flamboyant by prevailing standards. Not long ago, the casual assertion of judicial illegitimacy would have been shocking from a former and current speaker. These days, the argument that the justice system is so distorted by politics that in fundamental ways it cannot and should not be trusted reflects mainstream thinking in their parties. That highlights another reality. Johnson and Pelosi may have been reciting partisan talking points that they weren't only talking points. There's no reason to suppose they weren't perfectly sincere, probably milder versions of what they really believe. And I'll go down here to continue near the end of this article, is that it continues again how much our justice system has been hijacked by political narratives and ideologies instead of what is really right and wrong, for victories in justice instead of victories in ideologies. Take Trump's conviction. Before the trial, many Democrats privately winced that the charges, which were elevated from misdemeanors to felonies using an unusual legal theory, might not be the strongest case to make their point that Trump is a lawless president. Yet, after the guilty verdict, those same Democrats now publicly scold conservatives for maintaining that the whole exercise was unfair and would not have been brought against any defendant not named Trump. Many of those Democrats, incidentally, have defended Hunter Biden, who similarly was convicted of charges that never would have attracted a special prosecutor if his name were different, although Hunter Biden was not president or didn't run for president. Conversely, now many Republicans on truth serum believe Democrats have no fair reason to suspect that federal judge Aileen Cannon, a Trump appointee, as I was saying, they are going to swing depending on who's in office, who is overseeing the case against Trump for allegedly illegally handling a classified document after leaving the White House, may be going out of her way to protect her appointer from political fallout. Who thinks it is outlandish to suspect, as critics have alleged, that she is deliberately slow walking the case to ensure that no trial happens before the November election. It goes on as a vast right wing conspiracy. It goes down to talk about the other things from that make the left hands or the left side's opinion that they also believe that our judicial system has been hijacked by the political narratives. And I'll end on this in the article. It says, the coming battle. If many Democrats and Republicans quietly agree that blind justice's blindfold is slipping away, they disagree about how to put it back in place or whether it's even desirable to do so. Like I was saying earlier, politicians don't want to touch this because they use the judicial system for their own personal victories over their opponents when they can't get them in the legislative process. Or better yet, they don't want to do it through the legislative process because they know if they do it through the legislative process, their positions, they could get voted out or lose their positions of power because they created some law or were the catalyst for the creation of a law that might hurt their political friends, allies, or other uh, elected official friends in office. Back to the article. In certain precincts of the right, conservatives have moved beyond one-off denunciations of specific courts and their verdicts to more sweeping denunciations of the judicial system, which they argue is an integral part of the corrupt establishment that they aspire to destroy. Take, for instance, the ongoing efforts by Trump's allies to recruit lawyers for a second Trump administration who are willing to engage in the sort of lawfare that they believe the left has weaponized against Trump. As many conservatives readily admit, the goal of these efforts is not to reintroduce norms of judicial fairness and impartiality to the justice system. The object is to beat Democrats at their own game. The bare-knuckled approach has even filtered into the more rarefied segments of the conservative legal movement, where pockets of legal scholars have abandoned nominally neutral theories of legal interpretation, like originalism and textualism, in favor of theories like common good constitutionalism, which openly proclaim their conservative orientation. To do otherwise, many conservatives argue, is to fight with one hand tied behind their backs. Reading that article, of course, it probably slants more against Republicans, but it just shows the complexity that is a result of how both sides do believe that the judicial system is corrupt or is taking power, but they don't want to do anything to rock the boat of the judicial system, because it's easy to blame the other side and use the court system to get victories instead of justice, and create precedents for future elected officials to take advantage of. And that, my friends, is what we have in the nutshell on that. Don't forget about My Pillow this holiday season. If you use my promo code My Pillow, my promo WWFA at mypillow.com/WWFA, you get some really nice discounts with the system. I've got some memes I'm going to cover for the final half of my show. But before I do that, I saved two things on Facebook, which I thought were really important in my in some of the things I've been telling you here. One of which was a meme that was by somebody named Josiah Lippincott, and it was a post in the meme that said, "The Supreme Court has jurisdiction over foreigners only when they are in the country lawfully. The Constitution does not apply to enemy combatants on American soil, illegal immigrants, or to foreigners in their home countries." Follow this, because we're being told in the narratives that we have to give constitutional protection or follow the Constitution for all of these immigrants. But this explains why that's not true. But the Democrats are trying to do all of this through the judicial system to create precedent, to create more immigration laws via precedent, instead of doing what they should do, and Republicans too should get together and reform our immigration system to make it more effective and more efficient. But they don't, because it's not politically expedient for them to do so. It's easier for them to do it through lawsuits, because they can make the other side look bad in a lawsuit and win a victory in the public sector or the public arena, and at the same time create precedent instead of changing the laws, which doesn't create a good look on them all. The last part of this meme says, "Moreover, deportation is not a punishment. Foreigners have no right to appeal their removal to their home countries to American courts. Just a fundamental misunderstanding by the entire legal profession about citizenship." And the other thing that I saved on, I'm gonna I'm gonna pass on this other article that I saved. I'm gonna do that in another. It refers to the National Guard, and talks about whether it was legally right for the president to bring the National Guard into some cities. But I'm going to do that one in another one, because I've got some more memes that I want to cover on the show today that I think are everybody's be interested in. One of which is a picture of the founding fathers, and they're all they're talking to each other, and they're saying, "Gentlemen, gentlemen, I still believe shall not be infringed is quite clear. I mean, we won't be handing this nation over to morons, will we? Question mark. Of course, that's not a real quote from the founding fathers. And I don't want to call anybody morons, but I do want to say this. This, in my opinion, only points out the fact that politicians have used our Constitution in ways that they have been able to manipulate its meanings to be able to apply to what they need it to apply to, and then, in a moronic way, circumvent it through the court system. So, in a way, yeah, they did hand it over to some morons. Those morons being many of the elected officials that are circumventing the Constitution through our court system and the bureaucratic system which they created. Another, my next meme up is a picture of two weird figures. One's behind the court, behind a bench on the court, and that's why I brought this up. It says, "Good point. We can put him back into society without any punishment." This referring, of course, to many of the criminals that I brought up earlier, where judges are letting them back on the street after they've committed 30 crimes, and then they kill somebody when they should have been in jail on the first crime, second crime, all up to the 30th crime. And these judges are still letting them out. And the reaction to the other person, funny looking face in the meme, says, "Your Honor, my client didn't know that sexual assault and murder is wrong." Actually, I read that in the wrong order because the meme is written wrong. It's from the Atlas Society. On the top, it's got the judge's response, but it should be the other way around. In other words, "Your Honor, my client didn't know that sexual assault and murder is wrong." Good point. We can put him back into society without any punishment. You see, you laugh about it and it sounds crazy, but that's the case. There are many judges who have put many criminals, and we're hearing more and more about it, out on the street because they felt like, well, the criminal didn't know he did wrong. These judges are making rulings, creating precedent, judicial precedent, that which gets respected by future courts and other attorneys as being just the way we should do it. And it goes down to the DAs. The DAs are recognizing many of these actions as well. The judge, put this criminal back on the streets after 30 sexual assaults. So this one that created sexual assault, we're going to put him into a rehabilitation program back out on the streets because we know that the judge has set precedents for this. Please, my attorney friends, correct me if I'm wrong. But this is just my layman's observation that I'm seeing by all the criminals that have been getting put back out on the streets from a system where the judges are using compassion and ideologies and also see it as their duty to fight the other side. Some of these judges hate the right-wing elected officials so much, or they hate the actions of right-wing politicians or conservative politicians so much that they're going to do something that is complete opposite just to be able to swing that pendulum. Of course, I'm speaking hypothetically, to make their case. And so they hate the other side or the other ideologies so much. The idea we should convict all criminals, we should lock them all up. Okay, and I've got another opinion on this because I think there's cases to be made for many criminals who could be rehabilitated, and there's opportunity for that. But in the extreme cases, many judges are instead legislating from the bench, creating precedents to fight the ideologies on the side that they hate or dislike the most. We, the people, through a system, can find ways to fight this peacefully in a way to demand that our elected officials start working together in our judicial system in a way to create laws instead of precedents that create more justice instead of victories, but create more justice for society where everyone wins: safer communities, safer streets, and less recidivism as a result of activism from some of the benches or some of the courts. I know I went off a little bit on that one on the meme. My next meme says the government got involved in healthcare to fix healthcare. The cost of healthcare skyrocketed, so the government shut down the government to protest the problem they created. Or you start to understand the problem with government. I did kind of throw that one in, but again, it shows that our government also finds a way to create its own precedent through its laws and legislation to be able to fight the system from changing itself, if you will. So the government often creates bureaucracy and legislation as a way to create its own precedents. I know it does it through laws, I get it, but the government should be in charge of our health care is the precedent now. So our government keeps creating more and more laws around healthcare to create the precedent that we need government to control our healthcare instead of the free market system. You see, it doesn't just happen in the judicial system. The Atlas Society meme says your rent didn't go up because of capitalism. It went up because of regulations written by people who promised you cheaper rent. That, my friends, is another example. Our expenses go up because we keep handing government more and more power through precedents. If you look at it, yes, government and legislation, the legislative process creates laws that we should abide by, but through narratives and ideologies that these elected officials use to create momentum for these laws, it creates a precedence that we need more laws governing capitalism and our freedoms and our liberties. So future legislative bodies and future elected officials use the narratives and ideologies to get in office and create more momentum for those same ideologies to be used. My next one is a quote by some old guy named David Ricardo. Like all other contracts, wages should be left to the fair and free competition of the market and should never be controlled by the interference of the legislature. Obviously, I put this one in here because it just makes proof that we should not rely on the legislative bodies to create precedents over and over again to control every aspect of our lives. And that's what we're doing. We should not be controlling the basic laws of the free markets or capitalism through legislation, because when we do, we create a precedence in our legislative system to control every aspect of our lives. We keep giving the legislative process more and more control through precedents over our lives. And the more we do this, the more it's going to snowball and steal more and more of our freedoms. This is a judge that did something, again, jurisprudence, legislative process. This judge says Minnesota judge overturns $7.2 million in Medicaid fraud conviction despite a jury verdict. See that? The judge overruled the jury. So now you go from a jury of a few people deciding, what law should be followed or what verdict should be followed, creating, jury precedents. And then the judge takes steps in and says, no, I'm going to use my, my role as a judge to create my own common law. So now when these laws come in, when somebody violates Medicaid fraud again, somebody can say, well, there is a case. This Minnesota judge did overturn this, and the judge is probably going to have some notes on why, which only makes it easier for future criminals to get away with it based on the ideologies and opinions of some judge. Our country is being taken over by our judicial system, and we have to demand our elected officials to step in to curb this if we can. Ayn Rand of the Atlas Society, or the Atlas Society was created on the beliefs of Ayn Rand, says dependence breeds hatred. Only free men can afford to be benevolent. Only free men can love and respect one another. And again, if we create a dependence on our judicial system to do the right thing and our legislators to do the right thing through either the legislative process or how they circumvent the legislative process by going through the judicial system, we become dependent. And once we're dependent, we can't be benevolent. We can't foster a society. We can't foster a system, or a system can't foster freedom and love and respect, because when you respect the judicial process too much, we forget justice for everybody. Donald Trump, he says he will permanently pause migration from all third world countries to allow the U.S. system to fully recover, terminate all of the millions of Biden illegal admissions, including those signed by Sleepy Joe, Biden's auto opinion, and remove anyone who is not a net asset to the United States. Many people are arguing about this with Donald Trump, but problem is we have not expected our elected officials to fix the immigration system. And the immigration system is kind of like the wild, wild west. There are many rules that need to be updated, and our politicians aren't doing it. So it becomes harder and harder to be upset about this. But is he circumventing the law? Many will tell you no. In my opinion, I would like for our immigration system to work for everybody who wants to become legal U.S. citizens, because we want people who want to be here. If you're going to fuss about Donald Trump, by the way, this is why I brought this up after the meme. The other meme says, picture of Bill Clinton, 12.5 million deportations, 0 protest, 0 riots. Picture of George Bush, 10.3 million deportations, 0 protest, 0 riots. Picture of Obama, 5.3 million deportations, 0 protest, 0 riots. Picture of Donald Trump, 1.5 million deportations, 350 protests and riots. Goes back to show you that it is all the narratives being used to fight what is truly going on. My next meme is a picture of an elected official yelling at some people in the military. He says, "You must refuse illegal orders." And they say, the group says, like the one ordering us to get the COVID shots. And the elected official says, no, not that one. So illegal orders, of course, is now a hot topic on which ones are illegal orders that they're referring to. Of course, the Democrats aren't really saying which ones are illegal orders, but they're paving the ground. They're just making people think that there are actually illegal orders out there, but they're not telling you what those illegal orders are. My point? It's narratives, and it's the narratives and media that's just doing anything they can to muddy the waters. Who does this affect the most? It affects our military in a negative way. It creates uncertainty within our military. It creates uh, it creates division in our military. So, do we get mad about who's actually doing? Everybody wants to point fingers at these um, Democrats for saying that to refuse illegal orders, but no one's talking about the fact that it's causing division in our military. It causes it hurts our military. Why aren't we talking about more of that? In my next meme, it says, if you scare people enough, they will demand removal of freedom. This is the path to tyranny. It's a quote by Elon Musk, put out there by the Atlas Society. And again, it points to what's going on within our government. And I'll bring up precedents again, because when you continually scare people that we need more government, I'm injecting this, they're going to demand more government, which is going to be the removal of our freedoms, which is how our elected officials get more control over this. And they say, and I say through tyranny, and a lot of people say, oh, that's that conspiratorial thinking again. Tyranny is such a conspiratorial sounding word. That's not going to happen in our country. Maybe it doesn't. I'll give it to you. But the reality is that with the shutdowns and the narratives that the politicians are using to scare us into demanding government step in, we are indeed losing more freedoms as a result of the process. And we don't even realize it because we're being scared so much into thinking that government shutdown is a bad thing. Downsizing government's a bad thing. We're going to lose the Department of Education. Oh no. How are our kids ever going to get educated? Well, they're going to get educated because the power will go to the states, which is closer to home, and to parents, which is even better. The next meme is a picture of Congressman Thomas Massey. It's put up there by a friend of mine, State Representative Danny McCormick, who has this post says, being pro-liberty means being anti-central planning, no matter who is in charge, which is why I always tell people, keep your eyes on elected officials that are promoting freedom and liberty instead of more government. My next meme is from Bryce Lipscomb on X. He says, the founding fathers were libertarians. It's a point that I wanted to make, that our founding fathers weren't promoting Republicans or conservative policies. They weren't promoting liberal policies. They weren't promoting ideologies. They were not injecting ideologies and narratives or personal beliefs into our Constitution, nor were they injecting things into our Constitution that would be more compassionate to smaller groups of people. Everything they put into our Constitution was more about freedom and liberty for everyone, which actually makes them more libertarian minded than anything else. And that, my friends, is my last meme up here. But just to finish up a couple things before I finish up the show, I want to thank you again very much for not only listening, but for sharing the show. It would mean a lot to me if you shared my podcast with somebody who just simply believes in freedom and liberty. I'm looking for an area where we can meet more in the middle. I talk left and right and conservative, liberal all the time, but only to make the point of things that might get us shine a light on where we need to focus of instead of adhering to a far right or promoting a far left ideology. I merely want to point things out in a way that kind of makes you think a little bit more, makes you kind of realize, hey, maybe we do need to start looking at both sides as divisive. Yes, I agree more with my Republican minded, conservative minded friends on the right ideologically than I ever will with my friends on the left. But that's not to say that I have some friends on the left that actually have some good ideas. The problem is we add labels on top of ideologies, we add labels in the scarlet letter on top of somebody because they might say something or believe in one thing that we don't agree with. And instead, we cast them aside. And instead of searching for good ideas for everyone, we end up isolating individuals based on something that they might have said or a belief that they have. And we're pushing people into groups instead of trying to pull people together in a big group. Not that herd mentality is always the best way to go, but and definitely don't want to say group thinking because that's a 1984 term. Either way, we need to start looking at the absurdity and the ridiculousness of many of the things going on, not necessarily as a way to disagree, but as a way to use some critical thinking skills to dissect it a little bit. Because we're not talking about the concepts, we're talking about the ideologies of thoughts. We're not talking about the things that make certain ideas work. Instead, we're labeling it liberal or conservative, right or left, or some politician who may be popular or some politician that might not be popular. And we're sticking a label for divisive purposes. That is how we all lose freedoms and liberties, my friends. And that's why I just kind of try to bring a little bit more variety into some of this meme stuff that I'm bringing in to give you more things to think about. And in the meantime, we'll close this out with, by all means, go check out the Wellness Company. They got some great discounts, twc.health/WWFA. That promo code gets you 20 to 25% off right now through Sunday. So if you're going to get anything, go there now. And also, Patriot Mobile has a get 2 free months of service free when you use the code holiday25. And when you use that, that code holiday25, you got to make sure to put in there that William Wallace for America sent you, either when they're on the phone or at checkout. You got to say William Wallace for America is how you heard about them. And when you use that promo code holiday25 and my name, you'll get 2 months off. All right, everybody, please share the show with somebody else. Share the video if you're watching the video. Thank you so much for your time. God bless you. God bless America. And again, use your critical thinking skills, because I think if you start doing that, you're going to find ways to find more solutions instead of ideologies.